Brady. I am not one of the responsible CEOs here. I am with Bloomberg Business Week, and we do have responsible CEOs, and so I'm going to, this is going to be a great conversation, I hope, and I'm not sure, I think they are taking questions from the audience, so I'm going to open it up to the floor as well later on if you have particular questions. I don't know if I'm popping my peas, but I'll go down. Oh, look, I forgot all of my things here, so I'm just going to go by memory. And we're going to start with JP, who is with JP Bilbrey, who is with Hershey Company, Rosaleen Blair with Alexander Mann, Rakesh, Sachdev, and we also have Rob DeMartini. So forgive me for not bringing up, we're just going to have an impromptu conversation, which is great. So I want to start, I'm going to start with you, JP. We're talking about basically the importance of responsibility, and I think one of the things that is important as a CEO, to start by talking about how you've set your priorities, because especially with an iconic brand like Hershey, I think that you inherit a lot, but at the same time you have an opportunity to probably build a lot. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think as you think about priorities, one of the things that's really important is how can you bring the combination of commerce and social responsibility together. So a lot of it really has to do with what are some of the issues that face your company. So as an example for us in a sustainable supply chain, one of the important things is cocoa as an ingredient. Cocoa comes largely from Africa, 70% of it comes from Ghana and Ivory Coast. And so there are a number of issues that we get involved with, both from the education of farmers to get better yield, farming practices. We've had some programs where we've helped with communications that farmers have, and so it's really central to what the company does. Therefore, it also works well to make it a part of what we do from a corporate social responsibility standpoint. The Hershey Company has a long legacy of CSR, really from our founder. He used to say even 120.
Do you call it CSR? Is it?
No, the way we think of it is really the way our founder talked about it is doing well by doing good. And so we don't really describe it as CSR. That's a common way, I guess, to project externally about some of these topics. But it really becomes core and fundamental to what we do and who we are. And if it's a part of the value system of the company, you may have things you focus on differently over time, but it's really a piece of the fabric and the DNA of the company.
Yeah, and we're going to talk with the different stakeholders too. I want to move to Rosaleen, and I want you to talk a little bit, because you're in a smaller company and it is very much about workforce development. What are your priorities? How do you think about this as a topic?
Okay. I mean, we think of it as an overarching program. So I think it's critically important. We support our clients, although we're a very small organization relative to everybody else. We support our clients in about 80 different geographies today. And what's critically important to us is that we reflect the communities that we operate within. So we wrap all of ours into an overarching global citizen program. And from the minute someone enters the organization, we really focus on ensuring that they understand our values and what that means. And an integral part of that is the citizenship program, which we expect everybody to participate in. And that we've really got three kind of key headings for that. It's our CSR, so our corporate social responsibility, our employee well-being, and then inclusion and diversity, which for us is absolutely the heart of everything that we do as a business.
And Rakesh, you came to the job very suddenly when your predecessor died. I know you'd been with the company, and I'm curious, how much did you, tell me a bit about what was in place and your own priorities when you came to the job, and how you sort of shaped responsibility, because you're doing a lot on a lot of different fronts.
We are a science-based company, and if you look at the roots of Sigma-Aldrich,
every drug comes from Sigma-Aldrich.
Well, every drug, yeah, I mean, there's no drug today in the world that we didn't help shape in the discovery of that drug. But we started the company, scientists helping scientists, to make the world a better place. And so it comes so naturally to our people to be thinking about corporate responsibility and the things that we do to make the world a safer, cleaner, healthier place. And so my transition was just another step in the evolution of the company. I mean, it was already so well ingrained with all these initiatives that we've had in the company, that really was fairly easy for me to just carry the torch on. And, and we have done some great things over the last 4 or 5 years, which we can talk about, but yeah. So
well, before we move on, what have been your priorities? Because I think that's a good place to start. It's one of these areas where you could do so much, it could occupy so much of your time, but yet, of course, you have different constituencies. You have to run a business, you have to talk to Wall Street, what is it? Give me some sense of sort of where you focus most of your energy.
So I think this is a challenge for most of us as business leaders who run public companies, is the tension between the short-term expectations of the street right here and the long-term vision.
But we have 2 private companies, so they
well, I know.
lucky.
But, lucky. Everybody has shareholders. So, but I was taught a long time ago, even in the business world, that there's what's called patient capital. That's the things you invest in that you don't expect a short-term return, and you're doing it for different reasons. And so I think as leaders of businesses, you have to make sure you maintain that balance in the company, because it's, at the end of the day, if you give a wrong message inside the company, it's very easy to fall prey to these short-term pressures. And I think that's what we have to do as leaders. There's a purpose, there's a much higher purpose why we have these companies. In the short term, it's all about making money for our shareholders, but long term, I think we all want to leave this place a better place than we came.
So Rob, you're in an industry that has been under the spotlight for quite some time in terms of things like labor practices, manufacturing. How much do you think of your initiatives in that area as a differentiator? How much has it been industry-wide as a push? Give me some sense of,
Sure. Well, it is an industry that 20 plus years now has been one that NGOs find easy to talk about, and sometimes in good ways and other times in not so good ways. And I'm lucky enough to lead a company that's private and has a long history of commitment well before these initiatives even had acronyms. What's changing right now is so fast. We've doubled in the last 5 years. We're going to double again in the next 5 years. How do we keep that alive? And the key that we have found, and it's way too early to declare success, but we really try to take it and embed responsible leadership in our business. And we have kind of 3 major initiatives. One's called Enduring Purpose, and that's about continuing to make things in this country. We have 5 factories in the U.S. We're the last ones to do it, and we're growing. And responsible leadership is throughout that initiative.
And has that been important from a jobs perspective, from a political perspective, marketing? I mean, I know the Made in America, there's that pressure. At the same time, we're in a global world, you're a global company.
I did a short news thing on Fox a while ago, and the woman asked me if it was a marketing gimmick, which I thought was a bit of a leading question, but I said if you count doing it for 108 years, then I guess yes, it is.
A century-old marketing gimmick.
Right. But, it is a point that is deeply rooted in our culture, and so not only making things, in our industry, just plain making things, because most of my competitors outsource all manufacturing. We believe making things matters. We believe making things leads us to better solutions. And I'll give you a soundbite. This resonates in my ear all the time, that when we dug in from a green standpoint, it's an industry that for every pair sold, a half a pair is thrown away in the development process. We looked at it and said, we have to be able to do better than that. And we've made huge progress, and we got a long way to go, but we've cut that down by about 20% over the last couple of years under the responsible leadership heading.
Okay. JP, I want to talk about a little bit about just legacy and brand. And I know that Hershey had a very strong background in education with the orphanage, now the school for disadvantaged kids. How much, and you've got a family that owns a big portion of the company. From a communication standpoint, as you've pivoted to where the world's going and the needs change, how has that affected, your ability to innovate in terms of responsibility, and how much has it been an education process for your owners to tell them that this is important? Because there's certain things you can't shed as you move forward.
Yeah, well, I think there's aspects of all of that, they're really important. And one of the things that happens is every generation will have their own issues. So the concept of what is this generation's issues, one of the things we think a lot about is what is the consumer's relationship with food. And one of the things that we see is people...
Who doesn't like chocolate? Raise your hand. Right.
But you know, it's really important for us to understand those things. But one of the things that's changing a lot is transparency. So information is available that wasn't available to a lot of people. So people have a great interest of what's in their food. Actually, in the developing world, food doesn't change as much as you might think because we're fortunate enough to have a high percentage of our dietary intake that is solved for. So you'll have those kinds of issues, transparency, what's in the food, you know, and so on. And then you have this other side, which is very much around supply chain oriented things. So I think when you think about innovating into new areas, whether it's products, whether the evolution of portfolio, consumers really care about these topics, and it's good. And I think as an industry, we haven't always been as transparent as we could. So I used to talk a little bit about how some companies maybe choose to do things because it looks like you're doing something. You know, there's others that say, I'm going to do some things, but it may not really have scale. And then you always are limited by both the environment and the success you have, and then the interests of shareholders, whether they're public or whether they're private. And then the ability to bring those things together in a way that you can actually make a difference is what's so important. And sometimes that's challenging because you have these different things that you have to balance. But I think that some of the comments that have been made where if that becomes a fabric of an organization, it's things that people care about, and it's something that they come to generation after generation. The description may be different. But I think when it's a part of the core values of a company, you're going to be successful at what is important to that entity. And that attracts not just succeeding with consumers, but it attracts with succeeding with shareholders and then, of course, your own organization and consumers. And when you can bring all that together, it's pretty magical stuff.
Well, and Rosaleen, do customers care? Like if you're working with a client, how much do they care about what you do internally for your employees? Is that something that comes up? Is there demand? I know shareholders, for example, if you ask them, you know, do you care if there are women on that board? They're like, well, not really. I mean, maybe, but it's not how they measure success. They measure success by the value you deliver. Do they care how you get there?
I think there's a couple of different responses, I think, to that question.
Pick the best one.
Pick the best one. I think, well, I mean, you've asked a lot there. I think in terms of the women question, I mean, I fundamentally believe that actually, you know, it's less around whether it's less gender specific, it's more around, it's actually critical for it to have enriched boards and enriched companies. It's really important that you've got diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds and diversity of experience.
Yeah.
So it's got to be better. It makes it better for a better society, and it reflects the, you know, women have got so much share of the wallet today as well. You know, they're one of the biggest consumers. So it just makes business sense.
But do your customers measure you on things like that?
I think it's mattering more and more to our customers, and I think, the reason I pondered was because I think it does vary. Geography by geography. So, for example, it's significantly less important in Asia.
Why is that?
I think indigenous companies in Asia, it's less of a concern today. That's certainly what we're experiencing. I think in Europe, it's a very big issue. It really does matter to customers, and I think it's becoming increasingly important. And I think if we look at supply chains more and more now, you know, it's one of the key questions that they look at before you even
get in the door. Is it a growth issue? Do you find all of you, I mean, I'm assuming if you're a fast-growing company, just getting bodies in the door is, you know, that's hard enough, never mind, you know, sort of whether or not they're women or they're global. Is that part of it? Because Asia, you tend to have companies that have very fast growth. These are fast-growing economies. Is it cultural? I'm just curious.
I think my sense is it's more cultural than, and I'd be interested in what the rest of the panel think, but my sense is it's more cultural. I mean, I think the issue today for facing all organisations is there's too much debate around on the women issue, there's too much debate around the women at the top, and actually virtually no focus on actually filling the funnel to get to the top, and actually the sustaining funnel. So I think that's actually a far more relevant issue.
So Rakesh, what about your stakeholders? I mean, how much do you think that shareholders or customers think about this and look at, you know, how responsible you are as a company, vendors? I mean,
I think clearly the customers, there's a lot more conversation that we have with our customers about some of the things that we are doing. In fact, what we learn from our customers shapes how we think about what we do around sustainability. You know, we have programs on green chemistry. I think we have one of the most ambitious programs of most companies who are in this space, where we're trying to, one, offer products to our customers where there's an alternative product to almost every product that we have. We have over 250,000 products in the company.
So define green chemistry. Is that in terms of sustainably sourced? So
green chemistry would be things like, instead of doing chemical reactions in what is typically done in solvents, which is not very friendly, but finding ways to doing it in aqueous, just in water, just as an example. So we do many, many different things. So we are helping people do research in a much greener way, but also providing products that are greener themselves, so that leave less of an impact on the environment. You know, eventually, and there's a huge demand for this. It's not that we have a huge revenue today, or we make a lot of money out of that, but we think over time, this is going to become something that's important for the environment. It's going to be very important for our customers, and in fact, it's going to help us down the road.
And people would be attracted to Sigma-Aldrich, I think, because of the science that they can do, the innovation, the ability. How much do you think that these initiatives are something that attracts talent and keeps talent?
You know, listen, I think for the millennials, it's becoming very important, the purpose that companies stand for. And, you know, a lot of the young people, and even the people who've been in our company, are excited every morning when they come to work, is because they're coming to work for a company that in some form or fashion is trying to enable science to improve the quality of life. And, you know, today we are one of the pioneers in manufacturing the new wave of cancer drugs. We're in diagnostics. We're doing all sorts of things. And it's great. When people feel they're part of something like that, it brings new meaning. And that's what we're trying to do every day.
So I want to pivot to a lot of the people in this audience would be working in the sustainability space. Some of them would have very engaged CEOs, some would not. How have you, give us some sense of how you've structured the job, and how much do you get insight into what you're doing? Do you do you get quarterly updates? Does somebody report directly to you who has responsibility? I mean, there's so many different ways to embed sustainability in these functions in a company.
The way this subject matter, and it's a broad one, is covered at New Balance, and as I said earlier, it was started well before I got there. But we did, as we grew, we said, how do we keep that culture alive? Because it wasn't very much coming directly from ownership. Now we have a vice president of responsible leadership. She's here in the audience today, and she sits on the global leadership team and has a say and I don't want to call it oversight, but has involvement in every function of the business. So HR,
marketing, all of them would
product development, you know, all of the nitty supply chain, all the way across the harder functions, if you will, the ones that produce things, and by producing things have other implications. But importantly, there's a structure in place where we have a scorecard that the entire leadership team answers to.
Do you publish that, or is that internal? We do publish that.
No, we publish it externally at meaningful moments. We publish it internally much more frequently.
What's a meaningful moment?
We've done it annually.
Okay.
You know, when we have something to say, we'll publish it publicly. But more importantly, and again, because we're private, we probably have some latitude here. It's more for us to figure out where can we get better, and where can we do that. We sit down quarterly and go through a deep review of that. But there's stuff happening much more frequently and much more on a going basis. It's embedded in an initiative we call Data to Design, which is trying to get at that waste I talked about earlier in the industry. It's just the nature of athletic footwear and apparel that it produces a lot of waste. And we think we can make a huge impact in that, but we have to start all the way at product ideation. And what we have found is some of those principles are not only, and this is when it works the best, by the way, not only when it's good for the community and the environment, it's good for our business. You know, taking weight out, taking material out, that's what the consumer wants, and it saves us money. So that's maybe the best example where there's no misalignment. You know, the designers, the developers, they're trying to make great product with less material, and the outcome of that is great product and a better impact.
So JP, how do you structure it? Do you have a similar scorecard?
Yeah, it's really embedded in our overall business management processes. So it's something that we track and we talk a lot about. And in fact, a bunch of our management, team is sitting here. And so.
And are they mostly in one particular function in the company? Or?
Well, we through our global growth officer and CMO, this reports up through his part of the organization. Lee Horner, who's here, has responsibility, for a whole organization under her that specifically deals with this. But it's really integrated across how we run the business. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Is certified cocoa is something that's important to our consumers, and it's important within our industry. So we were very. Is that
like fair trade, or is it different now? What is certified?
The way to think about it is it's really focused on things like child labor, is the cocoa grown with good growing practices so that you don't have, people handling pesticides in a bad way, so are good farming practices followed, and can you trace the cocoa? Where did it come from? And so there's a total certification process. And, there was a point in time where I would go someplace to speak, and, there were a lot of people speaking at me, in addition to what I might have, been there to say. And, we made some public commitments around what we thought was possible. And the good news is that in the early days, we didn't think it was possible, so we didn't say much about it. Then we said, hey, I think we can get there. But we put ourselves out there and said, we're going to get there. And it began to change with other people in our industry, so we weren't certainly by ourselves, that these things were possible to do. And today, we've made a lot of progress, much faster than,
Is it an industry push in the same way that Rob was talking about, or do you feel like it was sticking your neck out?
Well, I think that we had good industry forward motion, right?
Right.
But we really stuck our neck out because we knew we wanted to get there. We weren't sure we would get there, but we committed ourselves to it. And what we found is there was a lot of things we didn't know, and through that process, things became possible, and the industry began to change, and our suppliers began to change because we changed the metrics that we were expecting from them. And so we really did make a lot of progress. But you have to have some people that do the heavy lifting. I mean, the thing from a CEO standpoint, you have to be willing to say these things are important. So you're given this platform. So if you're given this platform, you should do something with it. And if you miss that initiative, the company's simply not going to get there. Because there's some things that only a few people in the company can really lead. You don't do the heavy lifting. I mean, we're all here, we're going to get an award. But I mean, the fact of the matter is it's because you're the face of the company, not because you individually did the work. But because it becomes a part of the way you run the company, you get there. And so we're finding issue after issue after issue that when we commit ourselves to doing these things that are important and we make them a part of who we are, we get them done. And there's bigger companies in the food industry than us, but we also realize we have a voice. So we've found our voice now. We use this, we use it, and we're making progress.
Rosaleen, I want to talk a little bit about, you have insight into workforce and differentiation. I'm actually intrigued by what Rakesh said about millennials. I've actually seen studies where, in fact, millennials don't judge a company as much by that, in part because they move around so much. So they care themselves, but they might go to Hershey thinking, well, I'm going to be gone in 2 years anyway, whereas older employees, in fact, it's very important to them, but only certain types of social responsibility are. So I'm curious to get some insight from you in terms of where you think the world is even moving in terms of what's important, what keeps people in place, because you talked about some of the geographic variation. Can you tell us a little bit more in terms of even just the demographic variation and what you're seeing? And give us news from Europe too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would suggest, and I think this is something that we would see on a global basis. I think the millennials do care. I think that with the job market the way it's been in specific geographies, I don't think they've necessarily had a choice. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, I'll do it for 2 years because I've got a family to feed or I've got to get on the ladder. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think talent will choose, and that's kind of the key thing. I think talent will be the ones that will choose the organizations that they want to work with. So you might be able to attract employees, but actually the war is for talent, and it will be talent will be the ones that will actually choose the organizations that they choose to work for. And I think that's true of millennials. I think it's true of more mature workers. And I think, I don't think in the next couple of years, I don't think it's going to make any difference across geography. I think it will make a difference in the comp to the individual. I think there'll be a level where it will be immaterial, but I think past a certain point, I think people will absolutely be choosing. And I think the retention is a greater point, because I think that's where, attracting people is one thing, but actually retaining the talent, that's where the real skill is. And I think that's what will actually be I think those companies who absolutely, truly embrace CSR and can demonstrably demonstrate that and are doing it for the right reasons, they'll be the people who will actually win that war for talent.
Well, and it's interesting because it's almost like a baseline. It feels like all of us have to have a program. You're on stage because you've differentiated your companies enough that it's noted. It's noted that you're sort of going above and beyond what you have to do. How do you think, Rakesh, I think it's also even interesting to put it in the context. I know you can't say much about the fact that you've been bought. We don't know if the deal will go through, but is that sort of thing something that, even as you articulate it to your employees, that you think has been powerful in just sort of keeping them there in terms of the brand? I mean, I think that especially when we're in uncertain times like we are today and you are right now, what impact has the program had, and do you think that you've leaned on it a bit more?
As I was saying, I think the core values outlast any corporate involvement, and I think when the core values are so deeply embedded and we have close to 10,000 employees, that's not going to go away just because the corporate structure changes somewhat. Now, fortunately, we are combining with another company that's also a science-based company. So the two companies speak the same language.
And has a very active corporate
and
responsibility program.
And they're very active corporately. So I think the cultural values are going to only be enhanced, and our people see that in a very positive way.
What are your frustrations? If you could wave a wand and make something happen faster. You've also got the physical realities. Let's take, for example, your production processes. You're in the US, but you're also global. There are certain things like laws of physics that come into play when you're trying to eliminate waste and such. What are your biggest frustrations from the supply chain, from the initiative, from embedding this in the culture? It could even be social media and the kind of noise in the outside that.
I think in our case, and I'll try to connect to your question and also make one other point, that what frustrates me the most is that we get all these good ideas from both internal and external, and it just takes us longer to implement them than we'd like.
Why is that? Because just
the athletic footwear and apparel business is a conceptually relatively simple business. It is a executionally incredibly complicated business, and if you just think about fashion, if you will, it changes quarterly on a supply chain that is 18 to 24 months long. That's a bad combination, right? So we're 3 or 4 cycles in. When we're wrong for 3 or 4 cycles. And how do you fix that? Because the consumer is so willing to give us feedback. And I think that's what's changing. And you younger folks in the audience know this way better than I do. But millennials and all this discussion, you've got an entire audience, internal associates or consumers, who have a voice, and we can hear them loud and clear. And the challenge is, how do businesses get better at using it? Because I think for years you grew up and you wanted to know what the consumer thought, and you didn't know, and you guessed, and you used science and
now
whatnot.
It's a tsunami.
Now you
and
can tell it. They tell you very clearly, and the bigger challenge is for us to implement it. So that's the biggest frustration for me.
Okay, what about frustrations?
Well, you've got to have real focus to make a difference. And so one of the things that I find frustrating is that on a pre-competitive basis, you see a number of companies that may be doing similar things, but they don't know enough about what each other is doing. And one of the big risks here is that it's not philanthropy. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to...
And strategic.
And strategic. And so, I get frustrated when we don't play well in the same sandbox, when we can actually bring together resources and make it more sustainable.
Is so that's the co-opetition?
Well, we call it pre-competitive collaboration.
Okay.
And I think it's a way to bring together resource in a much larger way than you otherwise would be. And then when you start thinking about how do you budget around these things over long periods of time, you're going to make a greater difference if when it makes sense to work with other people, you do work with other people. And what I see often is that the risk is you're doing the right thing, you're well intended, but you just aren't going to make an impact. And we all have to do better as an industry, I think, to see those things.
Is there government pushback when you try to come together as an industry, for example, around sourcing to try and create more sustainable sourcing? Is that something that you have to be wary of?
Everybody has to behave around the real issues, right, when you get together in that environment. But what we see is that we work well across governments, NGOs, the private sector. And when you bring all of those different resources together and openly talk to each other, because if I go back even 5 years ago, a lot of times we did not constructively talk to each other, and we weren't having the impact that we ultimately could. And as we have tried as a company as well as an industry to do a better job of that, we've made a lot of progress. It's helping a lot of people, and probably at a cost that's much more efficient than it would have been before.
Mm-hmm.
So Rosaleen, talk about your own frustrations, or also the frustrations, since you're in the field talking to people around these issues, of the clients.
Yeah, I think of frustrations just at a very tactical level inside our own organisation. We're in existence 17 years, and we had 3 core values that we started that have been relevant to today. But actually just recently, I made an executive decision with the team, and we actually put in a new value, and that value was bravery. Because I think as we've grown, I think we've suddenly lost our bravery.
What does bravery look like?
Well,
coming on stage, brave.
Yeah,
yes,
very brave, or stupid. But let's put it down to brave. I think in the context here for me, it's around people, and I think I think as an organisation, weren't necessarily brave enough. So brave enough, for example, to take risks on the people we already had in the organisation. Brave enough to bring in people that were different from the people we had in the organisation. Brave enough with inside our clients to challenge the norm and actually not be the same as everybody else and kind of become that irritant and become that. And I think that's, so from a tactical perspective, for me, that's something inside our organisation that I think has been a big difference. I think for our, clients, I think many clients want to do the right thing, but are confused as to where they, there's so much and where do you focus. My sense, and certainly because we're an outsourcer, we live inside a number of very large corporates, I see organizations who are almost schizophrenic, and as such, their people don't understand what is it they're actually should be attaching themselves.
They pivot too much.
They pivot too much. And actually, it's about finding, 1 or 2 things to really get behind. And give people that clarity of what the purpose is and how they as individuals, irrespective of the level they are in the organisation, how they can get behind it and how they can as individuals have a meaningful impact.
I'm going to take questions from the audience, but first I'm going to ask Rakesh frustrations. Plus you have the public company limitations, I'm sure, in terms of what you can say.
Keeping that apart, that we have to always balance the short term and long term. It's not really a frustration, but the ability to balance your time and the times of that the executives have so that they are focused on some of these things. One of the things, in addition to all the initiatives we have within the company that I try and push for, starting with me, but also the leadership team, is for them to be involved with at least one non-profit activity outside. And today I'm involved with the Science Center in St. Louis, and we do a lot of neat things on the STEM front for young kids. I'm also involved with the botanical gardens, where we're doing a lot of research on preserving plants around the world, and where we can use our science. And our leaders are doing the same thing.
Why is that important?
I think it's important because it's easy to get immersed in some of the things that we are doing very specific to the businesses we are in. But once you step out, STEM is incredibly important for us, because being a science company, we want to make sure the kids who are coming up have at least what it would take to become scientists in the future. And it starts right from kindergarten to the 1st grade. We have a Reading Partners program in the company, where we have our employees go and read in elementary schools. And so that, at least in the local schools, so we want to make all the way up to postgraduate degrees.
And the frustration is time, 24 hours in a day?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're all busy with so many things, and and I don't think that'll go away, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the life we lead. So.
Do you feel, and I can't see the audience, and I know we're permanently locked at 27 here. We probably don't have this much time left. If you have a question, I guess, raise your hand, and I will, and or just yell out, but I think one thing that when you mentioned being strategic, I think it's interesting to talk about where you feel you make the most impact. Anybody, in terms of, for example, there are times when the CEO should weigh in, and there are times when you have to step back in part for your own time management, but also to empower your team to be doing what they have to do. Is this something you think about a lot in terms of how you maybe even have evolved in how you spend your time on these issues? Is it very much the public face? Do you have to talk about it internally at town hall meetings? I mean, give me some sense. You can't talk about it all the time because there are other things to focus on.
Well, I think for me, I look at where I can add value. And so if it's embedded in the organization, you're going to make progress. And then there are just other areas where your unique role can enable you to create value for others, that maybe you can solve for some things they can't, or maybe your voice can carry in some venues where other people can't. You can give the deadline. And so, yeah, so you've got to decide that it's important to you personally, and we all find the time to do the things we want to do. And so, that's how I think about it, because you have only so much time, but, these are really important things to us, and so, we get it done.
Okay. Do we have any questions in the audience? Well, this is a very, hopefully we're adding lots of value here so we can, so I'm actually going to ask each of you to give us a sense as we sum up in terms of, and Rosaleen, I'm going to start with you, and it doesn't have to be the total end of the conversation, but I think if you had advice for people in the audience who are working in this field, even in terms of the landscape that you're seeing and some of the emerging trends, what would you say are some of the areas that they might want to focus a bit more on that's becoming more important, for example, from a workforce point of view, from people caring, making choices based on this? Because I think we often live in a time where things are overhyped or underappreciated. So I'm going to start with the underappreciated.
Yeah, I would probably make it even more basic than that. I think sometimes we dance around the whole issue of corporate social responsibility. And I think there are a whole bunch of people out there that are incredibly cynical about it and perceive that organizations like us, it's just a tick box and we're doing it
because they see it as green market. What do they?
I think there's a perception that, I think often when you're passionate about this, I think it can be misunderstood. And I would suggest that as managers, leaders, I think we have a very unique and frankly privileged position to educate people that CSR is not just the right thing to do, but actually it makes absolutely perfect business and commercial sense. So I suppose that would be my thing. I think it's the education on the benefits of CSR.
Anything that you'd suggest in terms of being more effective in communicating? You're all busy people. When you're working this space, you're trying to integrate it into a culture. How can you be more effective about sort of being strategic with your time? Because ideally, you'd have the CEO on board for everything you do. No, that's not possible.
I mean, I think regular town halls. So I think the CEO should never not be the voice of CSR. I think that's absolutely critical. I think you have to have it embedded all the way through the organisation. But it's got to live and breathe in the organisation. But as a CEO, I think you've got a responsibility to reinforce just how critically important it is. But I think, we have a regular pulse survey that we do across our organisation, and that allows us to actually measure the impact that CSR is having in our organisation. I talked earlier about the 3 different areas that we look at it across. So we can absolutely see the measurable outcomes, and then we need to give ourselves the time to be ensured that then we're responding to that, because actually it's only as good as your response to the pulse point. So I would say, listen to the feedback from your people, but then be agile enough to then shape it accordingly to make sure that you're actually focusing on the things that matter to them, matter to the communities that they operate in, and importantly matter to our customers.
Okay. And Rakesh, any advice that you might have? Let's assume your own team is working very well, or you would not be up here on stage as well. But in terms of what you think would be effective ways to be focusing their energy and in terms of interacting with you and the community?
So, I mean, I agree with Rosaleen. This is not about checking the box. Pick the most passionate people who have a lot of passion for this, because let's face it, not everybody has the same level of passion on this. But if you pick the right people to lead this, of course, the CEO, as a CEO, you have to lead this, but make sure you've got passionate people, and it becomes infectious.
Visibly passionate.
Visibly passionate.
So laid back people
make
aren't
it
always the
infectious,
best CSR.
and then celebrate some of this. You know, we tend to celebrate a lot of the things that we do in the business world, and I think this should be at the forefront of celebration.
How do you
as well.
celebrate it internally? Do you have like the equivalent of an employee of the month?
You know, whether it's kicking off a United Way campaign or any of the initiatives. I mean, we have, if you were to enter on a Monday, we'd be popping balloons and giving prizes, and if there's a certain initiative. So it's, you know, it gets people excited. It's little things, but it gets the workforce really engaged.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
How about you?
I think to the question, you know, making sure that you've got strong alignment between, as was said earlier, doing well and doing good, and that you need to make those business benefits visible if they're not.
So you need to build the business case.
The business case, no question. And then the second is making sure that it's consistent throughout the organization. That starts with the CEO making it meaningful, but then making sure that you're driving it through the organization. What we hear in our organization is it's not so much the voice, it's amplifying, because the people that are doing the work, they want to see us do well here. They expect us to do well here, and I think the consumer clearly does as well. So it's a responsibility that you have to take on and try to get results for, and then, as was said, celebrate those results when you get them.
Okay.
I think for me, it's take the risk and you know, drive these initiatives for everybody in the organization. It's, you know, earlier when I said find your own voice, if you're passionate about these things, the fact of the matter is you can make a difference in the world. And wherever you're sitting within the organization, I think if you believe that, and you know, we talked about millennials earlier, they can smell what's real and what's not real, and it's very important to this generation. And so if you can make this a piece of the company's DNA and who you are, you won't have a hard time retaining millennials, because they want to be at a place where they can make a difference. And when you combine that with succeeding with your business goals and making these efforts a part of how you get there, and I don't think anybody really has a choice. If they don't understand that, I hope I'm competing against them. You know, again, I think you have to take the risk and get out front and actually do it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Please join me in thanking our panel of responsible CEOs.